mentioned, my name is Sarah Radican, and we are here to discuss the ROI of gratitude. And really, I'm looking at this from a leader's perspective. And no matter where you are in your professional journey, thinking about the lens of leadership as these skills apply, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, brings a little extra emphasis to just how powerful this particular skill is. As I mentioned, my name is Sarah Radican. I have a DBA, MBA, a bunch of letters after my name. I am a Chief Happiness Officer. I'll talk about that a little bit later in our presentation. What matters for this evening is my real focus is the employee experience. I am absolutely passionate. I'm actually an advocate for more positive employee experiences generally. And I'm especially fascinated as a researcher and as a human by happiness as it intersects in those professional spaces. As an internationally certified Chief Happiness Officer, I focused on the research in the workplace environments, and I did my doctoral research and really continue to dig into what happens to those organizational performance metrics like job satisfaction, employee satisfaction scores, retention, turnover scores, and things like that. What happens when we infuse gratitude intentionally into our workplace cultures? That science is so important to understand because there is a huge body of knowledge on this. And we know that we can create environments where happiness is a regular companion in our lives. And understanding how we can translate that body of knowledge is a powerful tool, whether it's in our personal spheres of influence or our professional ones. And I'm not just talking about my fellow nerdy types who spend time in the academic trenches. There are whole schools of practice really around increasing our happiness. For example, my spouse is a certified laughter yogi. There's actually an entire practice of laughter yoga, or its close cousin, laughter therapy. Look it up when you get some time. It's mind-changing. And companies are spending millions, and I mean millions of dollars on just mindfulness programs in an attempt to tap into the well-being that is possible when happiness is a more regular piece of our world. So I have a quick agenda for us to review for tonight. I have an ambitious set of goals for us. First, we'll look at the psychology of gratitude and what it is and how it works and why it works. And then we'll look at the current business landscape as it pertains to gratitude and happiness and look at some employee engagement metrics. And then finally, I will offer you 3 specific ways. There are limitless ways, but we'll focus on 3 tonight, ways that you can consider incorporating gratitude into your personal way of working. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I do use an interactive platform called Mentimeter for these types of conversations. And so I do invite you to participate as you are willing and able. On the screen, you should see a QR code, or you can simply navigate through your browser to menti.com and enter the code that you see on the screen. And trust me when I say that we will all get more out of tonight's conversation if you do play along at home. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to start with a tech check just to help me understand where you all stand on the topic of gratitude in the professional realm. So as we look at that Menti link, I'm curious, what is your professional interaction with gratitude? What do you believe about gratitude in the workplace? Maybe you think there really isn't a place for gratitude in the workplace. And by the way, there are no wrong answers here, but maybe you think the paycheck should be enough. Maybe you're skeptical and you think this could be a thing. I see we have some people who are unsure but optimistic. Oh, and I'm so grateful to see we have some people on Team Sarah who are convinced of the power of this tool. Oh, this is going to be a good session, my friends. I cannot wait. All right, so it looks like the Mentimeter link is working for people. Please keep your browser window or your app open. We'll use it a few more times throughout tonight's conversation. So let's anchor ourselves on a definition of gratitude. There are many, but for today, I'm going to use Emmons and McCullough's definition. So Emmons and McCullough are considered the seminal researchers on gratitude, generally speaking. And they define gratitude as the positive emotional response that we perceive when we give or receive a benefit from someone. Now, I want to expand this definition just a little bit to include someone or something beyond ourselves. For example, I believe it is possible to experience gratitude for things like the beautiful sunset through the window when we're working late, or the coffee machine in the office break room, or the perfect parking space. These are all things that can create gratitude in our world. And in my research, which I'll share a little later, what I find is that gratitude, even for these types of things, acts as an antidote to isolation and loneliness, because at its most fundamental shape, gratitude reminds us that we are not alone in the universe. All right, now hopefully you still have your Mentimeter portal open, because we're going to do another interactive exercise here. I promise we'll get to the workplace implications first, but I really do want to prime our brains for this conversation by giving ourselves a little dose of serotonin and oxytocin, two of my favorite neurotransmitters. These hormones are part of what help us create positive emotional states. And we are very fortunate because the human brain doesn't really distinguish between having a positive experience and remembering that positive experience. In both conditions, we create some of the same chemical responses. Again, whether we are experiencing the good thing or remembering the good thing, we get that jolt of feel-good chemicals in our brain. Now, if you have ever experienced a particularly large personal or professional challenge, you may have heard the expression, look for the silver lining. And while I'm not a fan of the phrase toxic positivity, because I don't think positivity can actually be toxic, that whole silver linings thing is shenanigans. I appreciate the sentiment behind it. We do ourselves a huge favor when we intentionally focus on the positive. And yet sometimes life is really messy. And when we ask people to disregard their authentic emotional responses to situations, that can be more hurtful than helpful. So I got to a place in my life where things were just really, really difficult. And so rather than throw sharp objects at the people who would suggest I look for a silver lining, I started looking for silver threads. And I use this phrase to describe little bits of positive experiences. And what I found were there were literally hundreds of these sprinkled throughout our days, even the really, really bad ones. For example, I remember a time when my kids were small and somebody brought a stomach virus home. Yay. And everybody was sick for what seemed like forever. And then one day I looked around and I realized, oh my goodness, nobody got sick last night. Now, if you are a caregiver or if you have been a child yourself, you might actually realize that's a huge relief. And yet it is not something that we would normally consider when we're thinking about the things that we're grateful for. And that's really unfortunate because collecting these small moments or these unconventional moments of gratitude periodically throughout our days is actually an incredibly powerful way to balance out our brain's tendency to only look out for the negative experiences. So to kick this off, we're going to go hunting for some of these bright, shiny silver threads. So in the Mentimeter platform, I'm going to ask you to think back, stretch your thought process a little bit, just over the last day or two. What is one thing for which you experienced positivity or gratitude or just a moment of happiness? Just one or two words. And really, don't overthink this. And again, I want to encourage you to think about things that may not conventionally make your list of things to be grateful for. If you have sunny weather, if you could send it my way, that would be splendid. So maybe you had enjoyed a cup of tea or got the professor that you wanted for an important class. Or maybe, I know many of you are working professionals, maybe you landed a big deal at work. Or maybe you did see a beautiful sunrise or a sunset. Any gratitude is good. Any gratitude is good, no matter how big or small. Oh, and I love seeing these things pop up on the screen. Oh, these are amazing. Kindness, a workout, health. Oh, 2-year-olds 2-year-olds are great. 12-year-olds, a little more challenging, but still amazing. These are wonderful. And thank you for sharing them, because again, I hope you got a little boost of positive emotion by thinking about something good. And I think each of us, as we read these things, also tell ourselves a story about what that might look like in our world too. So thank you for sharing, and I hope you had a little dose of dopamine in the process. Now, as a general rule, we tend to believe that happiness is a good thing and there should be more of it. I mean, this is in the American foundational documents, right? The pursuit of happiness, we're told, should be an inalienable right. And most people agree that we want our children and our partners and our friends and our colleagues and our classmates to be happy. And even in the workplace, most of us, 90% of us, say that we expect to find joy at work. And yet only 37% of the people in this survey actually found joy at work. And this data is from before the pandemic. I can only imagine what it looks like today. So, in an attempt to manage the sometimes seemingly unbearable chaos that is modern life, many of us turn to things like sarcasm or cynicism to cope. And this narrative has become, unfortunately, quite normalized. We hear things like, life sucks and then you die. We have a whole line of thinking around bridezillas and how that's a perfectly normal thing to have happen. And we even see baby clothing that jokes about turning to the bottle to deal with stress. Now, we may not always glorify the misery, but when we turn to sarcasm or cynicism, we really are wallowing. We're anchoring ourselves in that misery. And that is not a healthy coping mechanism, unfortunately. But to be fair, we also aren't necessarily dealing with the healthiest of workplace environments for most of us as well. Another challenge that we're really faced with is simply the language that we use to describe our experiences. So the English language alone has about 3,000 words, 3,000 words to describe emotion. And yet, as a general rule, we tend to fall back on the same 6, 8, maybe 10 core words: mad, sad, angry, happy. It's unfortunate. We have this plethora of language to describe our experiences, and we sink down to these basic concepts. Now, I often use tools like this feeling wheel when I work with clients around this, because it's helpful to understand our emotional responses and those of our colleagues in a more interesting and nuanced way. But what even are emotions? Well, no, scientists debate this hotly. And if you know scientists, that probably won't surprise you. But really, in a nutshell, emotions are simply the dashboard by which we interpret the world around us. And so if our physical or emotional or mental environment is generally set up in a way that benefits us or is conducive to perpetuation of the species, then we identify that as good or positive. And if it's not, we define that as bad. And our brains are biologically wired to avoid bad stuff. And this is where we get into trouble. When we make happiness the goal or the thing that we are pursuing, we're really setting ourselves up for failure. I want you to think about your life experiences on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the absolute worst day you can possibly imagine, and 10 being the best day ever. Over the last week or two, think back. Did you have a day you'd classify in that 1 to 3, like garbage dumpster fire way? And there's no shame in that if you did. I certainly had a couple of days like that. I mean, life is hard sometimes. Now, I hope that also you had some days in the 6+ range. I had some of those too, and I'm grateful for those. But when I say that happiness is better used as a gauge or a measure of a successful life, as opposed to being our goal, I'm not saying that we should forget hoping or planning or investing our time and our energy and our resources into experiences so that when we pause and look over our experiences as a trend, we say, am I happy? And the answer is yes, mostly. That's great. But the problem is when we equate happiness with success, which is what we do when we set it as a goal, when that doesn't happen, and it's guaranteed that you will have times when you are not happy, that's just real. When that happens, then we consider ourselves failures. And again, our brain is predisposed to fixate on the bad stuff. It's a literal survival mechanism. So when we create happiness in our brain as our measure of success, we are creating a doom spiral that's actually really, really hard to unwire. So if you take nothing else from tonight's conversation, I do hope that you take away the concept of happiness being a useful measure of how things are going, but not a useful goal in and of itself. But now we have a quandary. If pursuing happiness will not get us where we need to be, personally or professionally, what else do we have available? Well, I propose that gratitude is actually an excellent way to get our teams and ourselves into a more productive and positive place for both our careers and our lives in general. And best of all, it's free. So I'm going to start with some uncomfortable statistics and get them right out of the way. You're probably familiar with the Gallup organization, and they have been experiencing and researching this employee experience space for a really long time. And unfortunately, their most recent data is pretty dismal. Globally, only about 22% of employees report feeling engaged at work. Now, the good news is America is ahead of the curve. We're at about 33 to 34%. But that leaves 50% of our employees here in this country who are actively disengaged. So if you're responsible for a budget that includes salary expenditures, that means half of your people are collecting a full paycheck, but they are not fully invested in your organization's performance. And about 14 to 16% of American employees are actively disengaged, actively. And that puts our organizations at huge liability and risk for intellectual property theft and other really unpleasant outcomes. On top of that, in the US alone, turnover is estimated to cost us about $1 trillion a year, $1 trillion. And globally, we're losing about $7 to $8 trillion due to the lack of engagement in the workforce. Now, the American GDP is about $500 billion. That's a lot of money that we are losing simply because people aren't engaged at work. I don't blame them, but this is a problem for our businesses and our business leaders. 1 in 3 people also say that they do not trust their employer. And frankly, I'm surprised it's that positive. And it might surprise you to hear, or maybe not, that the types of employees, the classifications of people who are the most disengaged are healthcare workers and managers. This is super problematic. I mean, healthcare workers, that's obvious, but managers and people leaders play a huge part in job satisfaction, engagement, and the productivity of their teams. 81% of employees say they would consider leaving their position today if the right place called. And since the pandemic, 75% of people feel more socially isolated. 57% report having higher anxiety, and 53% are simply emotionally exhausted. Whew. Speaking of exhaustion, I want to focus on stress just for a minute. This could be an entire presentation. Yerkes and Dodson started looking at the intersection of stress and performance back in 1908. And in the century plus since then, thousands of researchers continue to build in this work. And we know that we as humans, and actually most species, need a little bit of stress just to get us moving, to get us out of bed in the morning. If you've ever watched shows like Alone, where they put people in really difficult situations, when they get bored, they actually stop performing well. The good news is we can go from boredom to comfort with relatively little amount of stimulation, and from comfort to our focus zone, that place of strength, with just a little bit more. And this is where a lot of people leaders get into a lot of trouble. the thought goes, if a little bit of stress gets us moving and a little more gets us into the zone, then just a little more will get us that much more performance, right? Not so much. Now, the tipping point varies by person and by circumstance, but at some point we do see a decrease in performance. And if that strain is not addressed, we will land in burnout or worse. I'm curious, for those of you on this call today, where are you right now? Let's pop back over to Menti. Let's honor that emotional experience. And again, your responses are anonymous, so feel free to report your actual state that you're in right now. And we talked about this, right? If you find yourself in that strain and burnout zone, there's no shame in that because life is hard right now. But sometimes it helps just to acknowledge the real situation that we find ourselves in. And as somebody who not that long ago was in grad school, I can appreciate what it's like to be trying to carry a full workload and manage academics. So kudos to those of you who are balancing that. It's complicated. So we have a pretty mixed bag here, but what I see is a distribution that's pretty accurate for most of the world. So congratulations, you all appear to be human. I'm grateful to know that. And I don't want to add to your stress, but I'm going to. The good news is you're not alone. 83% of US workers suffer from workplace stress, which means that their stress is acute enough that it's impacting their productivity or well-being or both. And 94% of us report feeling stress at work, even if it's not causing an actual disruption to our productivity. That same workplace stress is resulting in about 120,000 US deaths a year, which is costing about $190 billion in healthcare costs for the overall impact of that workplace stress. And it is also accounting for about 60 to 80% of our workplace accidents. So whatever we're doing to address stress in the workplace, it's not working, and it's costing our organizations a tremendous amount of money. Now, I'm the child of hippies, and I was raised to believe that it is my responsibility to make the world a better place. And a big piece of my brain and my heart really freaks out over the human experience that's framed by these numbers we just looked at. I'm also a scientist and a business professional, and I realize that as a business person, it's important to understand these financial implications as part of our decision-making process. I mean, again, companies of all sizes and across all industries are spending billions of dollars on workshops trying to address these issues. And yet engagement remains stubbornly low. It's not getting any better for decades. And the stress levels are still horrifyingly high. Now, I do want to say this is not just an American problem. These challenges are facing people and cultures and companies all over the world. For example, now, I don't speak Japanese, so forgive my pronunciation, but the word karaushi describes death by overwork. And it's commonly framed as stress-based heart attack, stroke, and suicide. Whew, that's awful that there's an actual word to describe that experience, but it just goes to tell us this is a unfortunately all too common experience. Now, that's some pretty heavy stuff for a Thursday evening, and I feel a little bad throwing all these unpleasant numbers at you. So I'm going to give you a little more dopamine. Japan might have a word for death by overwork, but they also have done some amazing research on the clinical benefits of looking at pictures of baby animals. What they found was looking at pictures of baby animals for just a few minutes is good for decreasing stress, increasing our focus, and improving our productivity. So I tried to find something for everyone. My favorite is the little octopus with his little tentacle. Oh, he's so cute. But the next time somebody gives you a hard time for looking at TikToks of cats, you can tell them that this is a doctor-approved well-being practice. So enough of the negative. Let's flip the script here and look at some positive experiences and how we as leaders can use gratitude to make them happen. To contrast with the Japanese, the Danish have a word too, which I also can barely pronounce, but arbeidsglæde actually means happiness at work. It is the only word in the entire world that is defined as happiness at work. And if you've spent any time reading about workplace culture, you probably know that our Scandinavian colleagues have done some incredible work cultivating workplaces and lifestyles that lead to consistently higher life and job satisfaction. You may also be familiar with the Danish concept of hygge, which makes the rounds every so often. It's a concept of comfort and comfortability and calmness. It's just this amazing space, and it's a cultural norm. It's really important to understand that this is possible in the workplace. I know we don't talk about it a lot, especially in this country, but there are whole places where these concepts are infused into ways of working. I actually went to Copenhagen to get certified as a chief happiness officer because I really was interested in the research and the science behind what it takes to create those workplaces where happiness is a routine part of the lives of the people who are spending their time and energy on these mission outcomes. So let's go back to our definition of gratitude, right? That positive emotional response that we get when we're giving or receiving benefits from someone. It is not necessary to even have a direct connection to the source of that experience. For example, if you drink coffee or tea, do you personally have a relationship with the coffee farmer or the tea farmer or the people who process those products? I know some roasters, but I don't know any coffee farmers myself. And yet I am actively, sincerely grateful to them on a daily basis. Frankly, so are the people who have to spend any time with me. But this is a great example of an experience you can have where you don't even know the person involved, and you can still experience gratitude for the thing that's happening. Hans Selye is the father of modern stress theory, and he said, "It is not stress that kills us, it's our reaction to it." And this is my dad, Bob. He's a retired behavioral psychologist and social worker, and my whole life he has said, you can't fix the flat tire while the wheel is still spinning. In other words, we need to take control over our reaction to the things that cause us stress, and we can. We just have to take time. We have to take time to recognize what's going on and then do something about the things that are causing that stress for us. And here's where gratitude comes into play. Unfortunately, we cannot always control the things creating friction in our world, but we can control how we respond. And again, I am not suggesting that we invalidate those hardships or pretend that they don't exist, like those people who say, look for the silver lining. But our brain is wired for negative stuff. Survival of the species is really important. So we have to choose to intentionally look for things to be grateful for. And again, they are everywhere if we just take the time to look for them throughout our day. So generally speaking, gratitude is just simply good for us. Research shows that being grateful improves our relationships, both at home and in the workplace. Expressing appreciation to each other also helps us build and sustain the connections that are so important. You know, we talk about like networking, but this is also connections with your colleagues, your clients, your vendors, and so on. In my research, I also found that 94% of the participants in my research reported a strong or very strong increase in their job satisfaction after just 1 month of actively practicing gratitude at work. And 78% of them reported feeling more trust and confidence in their colleagues when they heard a team member thank someone else. Even people who observe gratitude indirectly benefit from this practice. This ripple effect is incredibly powerful. Research also tells us that regular gratitude journaling has been shown to result in a 5 to 15% increase in optimism, and the health benefits of optimism are massive, and a 25% increase in sleep quality. We all could use better sleep, and gratefulness can help us get there. And employees who experience more gratitude at work report fewer depressive symptoms and decreased stress. We just looked at stress. This is a big one. Further, people who regularly practice gratitude do have a more positive mindset. And the research on the physical and emotional impact of optimism is just powerful stuff. Grateful people are also seen as more enjoyable to be around, which improves our professional brand dramatically. And in a grand segue into the impact on the business world, when we interviewed hiring managers, 86% of them said that when a job applicant did not say thank you at the end of an interview, they perceived that person as actually being poor at follow through and were less likely to hire them. Now, here are some more interesting statistics around gratitude. 93% of people feel more motivated when they feel valued by their superiors. 88% report feeling more engaged when they feel appreciated. 81% would work harder. 70% of people feel better about themselves if their boss is more grateful. And 95%, almost all of us, agree that a grateful boss is more likely to be successful. Now, the problem is that a lack of gratitude is really a major factor driving job dissatisfaction, turnover, absenteeism, and burnout. These are all problems we have. In research cited by the Wall Street Journal, about half of the people they talked to said that they do regularly express gratitude to their family and their friends, but only 15% said thank you at work. My gosh. 35% never heard thank you from their supervisors, but to be fair, 74% never said thank you to their boss either. We're in a gratitude wasteland in the workplace. And I do want to mention that for some things, you legitimately can fake it till you make it. Laughter is one of those. But gratitude is absolutely not one of those places. Please do not just go through the motions of expressing gratitude. Inauthentic gratitude is pretty toxic. It will damage your credibility. It will decrease trust in the people that experience that from you. It can create friction on your teams, and it just generally creates a pretty unhealthy culture. People can sniff out insincere gratitude a mile away. And I want to mention again here that some people will actually suggest that it's not necessary to say thank you in the workplace. There's this employee motivation consultant out in San Diego who says, "We thank people around here. We call it a paycheck." I would like 5 minutes with that gentleman because I think he's a yahoo. But how can you make gratitude part of your regular working environment to help decrease that stress and minimize the friction and really tap into all of these benefits that gratitude has to offer? As I mentioned earlier, there really are almost unlimited ways that you could do this. You know, we could talk about this for days, and I'm happy to connect and share more ideas afterwards. But I want to focus on 3 ways that you can start thinking about using gratitude in your professional experiences. The first one is to understand how you prefer to experience gratitude at all. You might be familiar with Chapman's work on the 5 love languages. This is basically the ways that we prefer to experience love and to reflect love to the people around us. Well, Chapman and his colleagues took this same concept into the workplace and said, how do people want to experience appreciation in the workplace? If you are familiar with the 5 love languages, these probably look very similar, and they are to a degree. So we'll talk about these just briefly. There are words of affirmation, right? That's when you actually verbally or in a written way say that you are grateful to somebody for something that they did. Quality time is giving people your undivided attention, maybe in a one-on-one or a coffee chat or something where they have your full attention. People feel appreciated when that happens for them. Some people prefer acts of service where you express your gratefulness by chipping in and providing assistance or offering to help them. Some of us actually like tangible gifts, coffee gift card, flowers, chocolates, books, that kind of stuff. And although it is less common in the workplace for obvious reasons, some of us really do find the most satisfaction from actual physical touch. In the workplace, we're talking about things like a handshake or a fist bump or a touch on the shoulder. Now, it's helpful to understand your appreciation language in the workforce, and it's equally important to understand the language that the people around you prefer to receive appreciation in as well. All too often what we see is a leader has a preferred style and they force that style, usually unthinkingly, onto the entire team. That's problematic in most areas, but it's especially problematic when it comes to appreciation, because not everybody wants the kudos on LinkedIn, and not everybody wants a gift card to the coffee shop. They don't interpret it the same way. So this is a really easy way to understand your team or your colleagues or your family members, frankly. How do you want to receive appreciation? And you can't really do this with others if you don't understand it for yourself. So we're going to go back to Menti. I'm curious, and this is not contractually binding. I encourage you to dig into Chapman's work. I'll have the link in the slides. But as you think about these languages of appreciation, which ones sound good to you? Now, maybe you're like, nope, I'm not talking about appreciation in the workplace. They get a paycheck. But hopefully one of these feels good to you in the moment. Ooh, I love it. See, I think our little sample here is such a great example of the diversity in even a group like this. Imagine how this plays out in a team where you're trying to navigate other complexities. Thank you so much for helping me make my point. So I encourage you to dive into this topic and do a little research, maybe read Chapman's book. On the website that I'll share, there actually is a quiz you can take to help you kind of get your hands around which of these feels like how you would want to receive appreciation in the workplace, and it's perfectly free. So thank you for your feedback. I really love seeing this. I like seeing the little bars bounce around on the screen. It's kind of cool. So languages of appreciation are one way that we can start to think about gratitude in the workplace through a different lens. But a real challenge is that too many of us have been trained or socialized that gratitude doesn't have a place in the workplace. So if you can frame gratitude as a formal value, or at least encourage everyone to practice gratitude regularly, preferably on a daily basis, you're going to go a long way to decreasing a lot of the stress, or what I think of as organizational inflammation, that is just natural in most working environments. Now, I do encourage you to consider making gratitude practices part of your way of working rather than a well-being initiative. Employees really need to have quite a bit of psychological safety and, frankly, just trust to engage in well-being initiatives, especially when organizations go through times of layoffs or predicted layoffs or just massive change. And when schedules are full or when performance is being scrutinized, it can feel really icky to focus on well-being. That's a soft sideways thing. So when it's a way of working, it makes it more permissible to use this as a daily practice. Now, many of the people that I worked with, both in my research and in my ongoing work as a consultant, already value gratitude as a personal practice. That's why they come to me. But because it's not a common belief in general for us to practice in the workplace, they feel uncomfortable. And again, they may have a supervisor or have had somebody say it's not necessary at work. But given the depressing statistics about how unusual it is to experience gratitude in the workplace, this just means that you're going to have to help give your people and yourself permission and unlearn some of those bad habits around gratitude in the workplace. It's destructive otherwise, but it can be hard to make that change. So to combat that mindset, you have to give yourselves permission to engage in gratitude, especially when it is not October or November, that kind of Thanksgiving time when we pay lip service to gratitude. So to do this, have your people leaders, and if that's you, I'm again encouraging you to lean into this and just experience and practice gratitude daily. You can share some of the business statistics around why this stuff matters and help shift that employee perspective away from gratitude as a soft skill and instead frame it as a business differentiator. I mean, encourage your people to add time for gratitude to your meeting agendas and their daily schedule. You might offer suggestions for different ways for people to engage in gratitude, like share the languages of appreciation information with them. And this helps us accommodate that diverse set of personal experiences and information styles and preferences. And it really helps honor the uniqueness of the people with whom we work. Positive psychologist Sean Aker talks about his daily practice, and he actually starts his day by sending a thank you email to somebody who's had a positive impact on his life in the recent past. I've also had clients flip this around and pencil in just 10 minutes at the end of their day to wrap up on a high note. This is a really good way to hack into your own neurobiology and just end things in a positive light before you go home to your family or leave your home office and deal with your dog and have a better mindset when you do. Or you might consider starting your meetings with a reflection focused or founded in gratitude, or just encourage your team to share kudos on a regular basis. Now, if you have supervisor training programs, first of all, congratulations. Most companies don't have very good ones. But if you do have a supervisor training course of some sort, talk to your organizational development people or learning and development people and see if they would be interested in including something around the business implications of gratitude and some training on how to do it authentically. Many of my participants validated the statistics we just looked at, and they said they really do feel that when their supervisors acknowledge them and appreciate them, they feel more valued, and they felt it actually improved the quality of their relationship with their supervisor and their team, which had a direct positive impact on their confidence and their overall well-being. The final recommendation I have for you this evening is just make gratitude expected, especially with your external stakeholders. If you've worked with clients and they've thanked you, you might have gotten that little warm fuzzy when it happens. And most of us, even if we feel a little funny about gratitude, like we've been trained not to expect it, do have a positive reaction, a biological reaction to experiencing gratitude. So if you are an account manager or if you have a client-facing team, I want to encourage you to encourage gratitude as part of those regular interactions with your clients. Maybe this looks like including a space in your after action review or lessons learned for projects. Maybe you can encourage or even incentivize positive feedback from your clients. For example, a hotel chain that we frequent has made it known that when they get a positive feedback with naming a particular employee, that employee actually gets a small cash bonus. Now we know that people are not shy about complaining when they're unhappy. So again, it's up to us to create that channel by which they can express their appreciation and their positive feedback. They're just out of habit, right? Most of us are not in the practice of experiencing or giving gratitude regularly. We just don't do it as much in our culture. So make it easy. Create that positive feedback, call it a kudos channel or whatever it works for you. But just create that strategic opportunity for gratitude to be part of that conversation. This will have positive benefits for your employees and your clients. It improves your brand reputation, and it really does strengthen the relationship and the loyalty that you have with these people because they start to associate your brand or your company or just your relationship as being a positive one. And it helps balance out the inevitable hiccups that happen as part of life. I mean, this is really a win-win, and it can be a real differentiator for your organization. I just want to also encourage you to celebrate what's right as often as you can, because the truth is the adrenaline rush that we get from being freaked out when we panic will help you lift the car off of somebody in an emergency or push through that 11th hour project when the client is beating down your inbox. But over time, that kind of stress can and will create significant damage to our bodies, our minds, and really our souls. Instead, when we use gratitude to create environments where happiness is a regular companion, we can tap into this really infinitely sustainable power source. And that's why I often say that happiness is courage. And this professional positivity will take you places that stress and anger and frustration simply can't. So just to wrap us up for this portion, I want to remind you that we talked about kind of what gratitude is and how it works. We looked at some uncomfortable and uplifting statistics around gratitude in the workplace. And we had 3 potential ways that you might consider increasing gratitude in your professional experience.